Daniel Park was tired of war. He had spent 8 years fighting in the frontier wars, watching his friends die on distant planets, killing enemies he had never hated. When the war ended, he received a medal, a handshake, and a ticket back to civilian life. The military had no more use for him, so he became a cargo hauler. It was simple work. He flew his small ship from station to station, carrying supplies, equipment, and sometimes passengers who did not want to answer questions. He lived alone. He slept badly. He tried not to think about the past. Meridian 7 was a trading station on the edge of known space. It floated in the darkness between star systems, a meeting place for merchants, smugglers, and travelers of 100 different species. Daniel had stopped there to refuel and pick up a new contract. He planned to stay one night, maybe two. That plan changed when he heard the screams. He was walking through the lower docks, the old section of the station where the lights flickered and the security cameras had stopped working years ago. Most people avoided this area after dark. Daniel did not care. He had walked through worse places. The screams came from a narrow corridor to his left. A woman's voice, high and desperate. Then the sound of fighting. Daniel stopped. His hand moved to the pistol at his hip. It was an old military weapon, worn from years of use. His therapist had told him to get rid of it. He had not listened. He should walk away. This was not his problem. He was not a soldier anymore. But his feet were already moving toward the sound. The corridor opened into a small loading area. 5 figures stood in a circle, their faces hidden behind masks. They carried knives and shock sticks, weapons meant to hurt but not kill. In the center of the circle stood their target. Daniel had never seen a Valoran in person before. He knew about them, of course. Everyone did. They were the ruling species of the Ascendant Empire, the most powerful civilization in the galaxy. They were giants, standing 8 or 9 feet tall, with skin in shades of blue and purple and silver hair that flowed like water. They were warriors, diplomats, and rulers. They looked down on humans the way humans look down on insects. This Valoran was a woman. She stood nearly 9 feet tall, her skin a deep violet color, her silver hair tangled and dirty. Blue blood ran from a wound on her arm. Her golden eyes were wide with fear and anger. She was also holding something against her chest, a bundle wrapped in cloth. It moved slightly, and Daniel realized it was a child. The raiders were closing in. One of them laughed, a cruel sound that echoed in the small space. "Nowhere to run, princess," he said. "Hand over the brat, and maybe we let you live." The Valoran woman bared her teeth. Even wounded, even outnumbered, she looked ready to fight to the death. But Daniel could see she was weak. She had lost too much blood. She could not protect herself and the child at the same time. The raiders had not noticed him yet. He was just a shadow at the edge of the room, a small human in worn clothes. Nothing important. Daniel raised his pistol. The first shot hit the laughing raider in the shoulder. He spun and fell, screaming. Before the others could react, Daniel fired twice more. 2 more bodies hit the ground. The remaining 2 raiders turned toward him. One threw a knife. Daniel stepped aside, feeling the blade pass close to his face. He fired again, and the knife thrower dropped. The last raider ran. His footsteps echoed through the corridor as he disappeared into the darkness of the station. Silence fell over the loading area. Daniel lowered his pistol, but did not holster it. He turned to face the Valoran woman. She was staring at him. Her golden eyes were huge, filled with an emotion he could not read. Surprise, perhaps, or confusion. Humans were not supposed to do things like this. Humans were supposed to be weak, cowardly, concerned only with their own survival. Daniel looked at the blood still flowing from her arm. "You're hurt," he said. His voice was calm, steady. The voice he had used during the war when everything was falling apart and someone needed to stay in control. "I know a medic who doesn't ask questions. Can you walk?" The woman did not answer. She continued to stare at him, her arms tight around the child. "My name is Daniel," he said. "Daniel Park. I'm not going to hurt you. But those men might come back with friends. We should move." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the woman nodded. Just once, a small movement of her head. Daniel turned and walked toward the corridor that led to the upper levels. Behind him, he heard heavy footsteps. The Valoran was following. The medic was an old alien named Grix, who ran a small clinic in the mid-levels. He was short, wrinkled, and had seen too much to be surprised by anything. When Daniel arrived with a bleeding Valoran princess and an infant, Grix simply pointed to a bed and started preparing his instruments. "Knife wound," he said, examining the woman's arm. "Deep but clean. You'll live." He looked at Daniel. "You bring me the most interesting patients." Daniel did not respond. He stood by the door, watching the corridor, his hand still on his pistol. The woman had not spoken a single word since the loading area. She sat on the bed, holding the child, her eyes never leaving Daniel's face. "The child is unharmed," Grix announced after a quick examination. Scared, but healthy. He began stitching the woman's wound. "You have a name, tall one?" The woman was silent for a moment. Then she spoke, her voice low and musical, despite her obvious exhaustion. "Yuna," she said. "My name is Yuna." "Well, Yuna," Grix said, "you're lucky this human found you. Most people would have walked away." Yuna looked at Daniel again. Her golden eyes seemed to see through him, into the parts of himself he tried to keep hidden. "Yes," she said quietly. "I was lucky." Daniel felt uncomfortable under her gaze. He turned away, pretending to check the corridor. "You should rest," he said. "I'll keep watch." He did not sleep that night. He sat in a chair by the door, his pistol in his lap, listening to the sounds of the station. Somewhere in the distance, he could hear music and laughter. Normal life, continuing as if nothing had happened. In the bed, Yuna slept with the child in her arms. Even in sleep, she held the infant close, protecting it with her body. Daniel watched her and wondered what kind of trouble he had gotten himself into. He would find out soon enough. Daniel was in the clinic when the station's alarms began to scream. Red lights flashed in every corridor. Announcements blared from speakers in a dozen different languages. A fleet of Valoran warships had surrounded Meridian 7, their weapons pointed at the station's hull. Grix looked up from his work and sighed. "I think your guest has powerful friends." Yuna was already standing. The color had returned to her face, and she moved with new strength. The child was awake now, a small girl with violet skin and curious silver eyes. She clung to Yuna's neck, watching everything with quiet attention. "They found me," Yuna said. There was relief in her voice, but also something else. Something that sounded almost like sadness. Within minutes, Imperial soldiers filled the clinic. They were enormous, even larger than Yuna, wearing armor that gleamed like polished mirrors. They moved with perfect discipline, forming a protective circle around the princess and the child. Their commander, a scarred warrior with cold eyes, looked at Daniel with obvious disgust. "This is the human?" he asked Yuna. "This small creature?" "This small creature saved my life," Yuna replied. Her voice was sharp. "And the life of your future empress. You will speak of him with respect." The commander's face tightened, but he said nothing more. He bowed to Yuna and began barking orders at his soldiers. Daniel watched them prepare to leave. He had expected this moment. The princess would return to her people, the child would be safe, and he would go back to his empty ship and his quiet life. A strange adventure, nothing more. A story to tell in bars. But as the soldiers began to escort Yuna toward the door, she stopped. She turned and looked at Daniel one final time. "Thank you," she said. The words were simple, but her voice carried weight. "I will not forget what you did." Then she was gone, surrounded by giants in shining armor, disappearing into the crowds of the station. Daniel stood alone in the empty clinic. Grix patted his arm sympathetically. "Strange universe," the old alien said. "You never know what tomorrow will bring." Tomorrow brought Imperial guards to Daniel's quarters. They arrived at dawn, 6 soldiers in ceremonial dress, carrying a scroll sealed with golden wax. Their leader, a young Valoran with nervous eyes, bowed deeply. "Daniel Park of Earth," he announced. "You are summoned to appear before His Imperial Majesty, Emperor Taean of the Ascendant Empire. You will come with us immediately." It was not a request. The Emperor's flagship was called the Eternal Dawn. It was the largest ship Daniel had ever seen. A city floating in space, big enough to hold millions of people. Its hull was covered with patterns of gold and silver, designs that told stories of ancient victories and legendary heroes. Daniel felt very small as he walked through its corridors. The Valoran soldiers around him were twice his height. The ceilings stretched far above his head. Everything was built for giants, and he was just a tiny human lost in a world that was not meant for him. The throne room was the size of a stadium. Columns of crystal rose toward his ceiling painted with stars. Thousands of Valorans filled the chamber, nobles in fine robes, warriors in gleaming armor, servants carrying trays of food and drink. They all fell silent as Daniel entered. He could feel their eyes on him, curious, confused. Some of them were laughing quietly, amused by the sight of this small creature walking toward their emperor. The throne itself was made of light. It floated in the center of the chamber, surrounded by rings of energy that pulsed with soft colors. And on the throne sat Emperor Taehan. He was old. That was Daniel's first thought. Old in a way that went beyond years. His violet skin was lined with age. His silver hair had faded to white, and his golden eyes held the weight of centuries. But there was nothing weak about him. Power radiated from his body like heat from a fire. This was a being who had ruled an empire for longer than humans had traveled among the stars. Beside the throne stood Yuna. She wore robes of flowing silver, and her wounds had been fully healed. The child was nowhere to be seen, probably safe in some protected nursery. Yuna's face showed no expression as Daniel approached. He stopped at the base of the throne and bowed. He had been taught the proper form on the shuttle ride over, practicing until his back ached. He hoped he did not look too foolish. "Rise," the Emperor commanded. His voice filled the chamber like thunder. Daniel straightened and looked up at the ruler of the greatest empire in the galaxy. "Daniel Park of Earth," the Emperor said. "You saved the life of my youngest daughter. You saved the life of my granddaughter, the child of my eldest son who died in battle last year. The debt that House Kale owes you cannot be measured." Daniel swallowed. "I did what anyone would do, Your Majesty." A ripple of sound passed through the crowd. Quiet laughter, whispered comments. Daniel heard the words, "human arrogance," repeated several times. The Emperor raised one massive hand, and silence fell immediately. "You are wrong," he said. "Not anyone would have done what you did. Most would have walked away. Most would have been afraid. But you were not afraid. You acted with honor and courage, as a true warrior should." He leaned forward on his throne, and Daniel felt the full force of his attention. "There is an ancient law in our empire," the Emperor continued. "When a member of the imperial bloodline owes a life debt, that debt must be repaid in full. There is only one way to repay such a debt." Daniel felt a cold feeling growing in his stomach. Something was wrong. This was going somewhere he had not expected. The Emperor smiled. It was not a kind smile. "You will marry my daughter," he said. "You will become part of House Kale. Your blood will join with ours, and your descendants will carry the honor of both our peoples." The chamber exploded with noise. Shouts of protest, cries of disbelief, angry voices arguing in the Valoran language. Daniel stood frozen, unable to believe what he had just heard. He looked at Una. She stood perfectly still, her face carved from stone. But her hands, hidden in the folds of her robes, were clenched into fists. "With respect to your majesty," Daniel managed to say, "this has to be a mistake. I'm a cargo hauler. I'm human. This isn't possible." "The law is absolute," the Emperor replied. His voice allowed no argument. "My daughter's life was saved by your hands. Now your fates are bound together. The wedding will take place in 3 days." Daniel opened his mouth to protest further, but the Emperor raised his hand again. "This audience is concluded," he said. "Take him to his quarters. Prepare him for the ceremony." Guards surrounded Daniel before he could speak. They led him away from the throne, away from the staring crowd, away from the woman he was apparently going to marry. As he left the chamber, he looked back one final time. Una was watching him, her golden eyes unreadable. In 3 days, she would be his wife. Daniel had survived war, fought monsters, and faced death more times than he could count. But nothing had prepared him for this. He stood in the Temple of Light, wearing robes that cost more than his ship. Thousands of Valorans watched from tiered seats that rose toward the painted ceiling. Cameras floated in the air, broadcasting the ceremony to billions of viewers across the Empire. The human who was marrying a princess. The cargo hauler who had stumbled into royalty. Daniel felt like a fool. Una stood beside him, towering over him by 3 feet. She wore a gown of white and gold, and her silver hair had been arranged in an elaborate style that must have taken hours to create. She looked beautiful. She also looked like she wanted to be anywhere else in the galaxy. The priests spoke words in the ancient Valoran language. Daniel repeated the phrases he had memorized, hoping his pronunciation was not too terrible. He placed his hand on a glowing crystal. He drank from a golden cup. He did everything he was told to do, moving through the ceremony like a man in a dream. When it was over, the crowd cheered. It was not a warm sound. There was politeness in it, obligation, but very little joy. The nobles of the Empire had been forced to accept this marriage, but they did not have to like it. The reception lasted for hours. Daniel stood beside Una, shaking hands with dignitaries whose names he forgot immediately. Everyone was polite. Everyone smiled. But he could see the contempt in their eyes. To them, he was a curiosity at best, an insult at worst. A small human who had somehow attached himself to one of the most powerful families in existence. "You are handling this well," Una said quietly. It was the first time she had spoken to him all day. "I've had worse days," Daniel replied. "Once I had to fight off a swarm of cricks with nothing but a knife. At least nobody here is trying to eat me." Una made a sound that might have been a laugh, or might have been a cough. It was hard to tell. "Do not be so certain," she said. "Some of these nobles would gladly see you dead." Daniel looked around the room at the smiling faces. That's comforting. The quarters in the palace were enormous. Daniel could have fit his entire ship inside the main room. There were separate bedrooms, a private garden, a library filled with books and languages he could not read. Everything was beautiful, expensive, and completely unfamiliar. On the first night, Daniel slept on a couch in the sitting room. It seemed inappropriate to share a bedroom with a woman he barely knew. Princess or not, on the second night, he did the same. On the third night, Una found him there. "You do not need to sleep on the furniture," she said. She stood in the doorway, wearing simple sleeping clothes, her silver hair loose around her shoulders. Without the formal robes and elaborate styling, she looked younger. More human, somehow, despite her alien appearance. There are many rooms. You may choose anyone you wish. I didn't want to assume, Daniel said. Yuna nodded slowly. You are. Not what I expected. What did you expect? She was quiet for a moment. I expected someone who would try to take advantage of the situation. Someone who would use this marriage to gain power or wealth. Most beings would. I'm not most beings, Daniel said. I'm just a guy who made a choice in a dark corridor. I didn't do it for a reward. Yuna studied him with her golden eyes. No, she said finally. You did not. That is what makes you strange. She turned and walked back toward her bedroom. At the door, she paused. Good night, Daniel Park. Perhaps tomorrow we can begin to know each other. The weeks that followed were difficult. Daniel was lost in a world he did not understand. The palace was a maze of corridors and chambers, filled with servants who bowed when he passed, and nobles who pretended he did not exist. He had no role, no purpose. He was the princess's husband, but what did that mean? What was he supposed to do? Yuna was busy with her duties. She attended council meetings, reviewed military reports, and spent hours each day with her niece, the little girl Daniel had helped save. The child's name was Sora, and she was the last living heir of Yuna's dead brother. In the complex politics of the Empire, Sora was incredibly important. Many people wanted to control her, and many others wanted her dead. Daniel and Yuna rarely spoke. When they did, the conversations were polite but empty. They were strangers, living in the same space. Connected by law but nothing else. Then Daniel discovered the training grounds. He found them by accident, wandering through the palace during another sleepless night. The grounds were located in a lower level, a vast arena where Valoran soldiers practiced combat. Even at this late hour, warriors were sparring with weapons and bare hands, their movements fast and powerful. Daniel stood at the edge of the arena, watching. He missed this. The simplicity of physical combat, the clarity of knowing exactly what you needed to do. His body still remembered the years of training, the muscle memory that had kept him alive through countless battles. You want to fight? The voice came from behind him. Daniel turned and found a young Valoran warrior watching him with amusement. The warrior was smaller than most, only about 7 feet tall, with a scar across his nose and a confident smile. I'm not sure that would be fair, Daniel said. The warrior laughed. You are right. It would not be fair. To me. He grinned and tossed Daniel a training sword. I have heard stories about humans. They say you are weak but clever. They say you fight dirty. I want to see for myself. Daniel caught the sword and tested its weight. It was heavier than he was used to, but manageable. What's your name? He asked. Kevin, the warrior replied. I am a cousin of the princess, far down the line. Nobody important. He raised his own weapon. Now show me what humans can do. The fight lasted 3 minutes. Kevin was faster and stronger, but Daniel was experienced. He knew how to use his smaller size, how to slip under attacks and strike at weak points. He knew how to make larger opponents waste their energy. When it was over, Kevin was on the ground, Daniel's sword at his throat. The arena had gone silent. Every warrior in the training grounds was staring at them. Kevin laughed loudly and slapped the floor in surrender. The stories are true, he announced. The humans fight like demons. He jumped to his feet and clapped Daniel on the shoulder, nearly knocking him down. You must come back tomorrow. I wish to lose again. Daniel returned the next day, and the day after that. Word spread through the palace about the human who could defeat Valoran warriors. Some came to challenge him, hoping to prove their superiority. Most of them lost, but more importantly, Daniel finally had something to do. A purpose. A place where he belonged. And slowly, Through the shared language of combat, he began to make friends. One evening, Daniel returned to his quarters to find Yuna waiting for him. She was sitting in the garden, surrounded by glowing flowers, the little Sora asleep in her lap. "I heard about your activities in the training grounds," she said. "You have been causing quite a stir." Daniel sat down across from her. "I needed something to do. I was going crazy just sitting around." Yuna nodded. "I understand. I have not been welcoming. This situation has been difficult for me as well. I did not choose this marriage." "I did not choose you. Neither did I," Daniel said. "No, you chose to save my life. And then my father chose everything else." She looked down at the sleeping child in her arms. "But perhaps we can make the best of what we have been given. Perhaps we can make the bending. Perhaps we can try to be partners, if not anything more." Daniel considered this. "I'd like that," he said. For the first time since the wedding, Yuna smiled. It was a small smile, hesitant and uncertain, but it was real. "Then let us begin again," she said. "Hello, Daniel Park. My name is Yuna. It is nice to meet you." Daniel smiled back. "Hello, Yuna. It's nice to meet you too." Outside the window, the stars burned bright and cold. Somewhere in those stars, enemies were gathering, plots were forming, and danger was approaching. But for now, in this quiet garden, two strangers had taken the first step towards something new. Daniel woke to the sound of breaking glass and was on his feet before his eyes were fully open. Years of war had trained his body to react without thinking. His hand found the ceremonial blade on his bedside table, a gift from Kevin that most people thought was just decoration. It was not. Shouts echoed through the corridor outside his room. The clash of metal. A scream that was cut short. Daniel moved. He burst through his door and found chaos. The hallway was filled with shadows, dark figures in black armor fighting against the palace guards. Bodies already lay on the ground, both attackers and defenders. At the center of the battle stood Yuna. She was magnificent. Even in her sleeping clothes, even surrounded by enemies, she fought like a storm given physical form. Her movements were fluid and deadly, a dance of violence that Daniel had never seen before. She wielded a curved blade that seemed to sing through the air, cutting down anyone who came close. But there were too many attackers. For everyone she defeated, two more took their place. And she was protecting something, keeping her body between the assassins and the door behind her, Sora's room. The little girl was in there. Daniel did not hesitate. He charged into the battle. A human should not have been able to fight Valorants. He was smaller, weaker, slower. But humans had learned long ago that rules were meant to be broken. Daniel slipped under a sword swing, drove his blade into an exposed joint in black armor. He rolled away from a kick that would have shattered his bones, came up behind another attacker, and opened his throat. He fought the way humans had, always fought, dirty, desperate, without honor or mercy. He aimed for eyes and throats and the soft spaces between armor plates. He used every trick he had learned in the war, every desperate technique that had kept him alive when he should have died. The assassins were not prepared for this. They had expected guards, soldiers, who fought by rules and traditions. They had not expected a small human who attacked like a wild animal. Within minutes, the corridor was clear. Dead bodies covered the floor. Daniel stood beside Yuna, both of them breathing hard, both covered in blood that was not entirely their own. "You fight well," Yuna said. Her voice was calm, as if they had just finished a training exercise. "For a human." "You're welcome," Daniel replied. "For a giant." Something passed between them in that moment. A shared understanding. They had fought together, bled together. Whatever their marriage had been before, it was something different now. The investigation that followed revealed a terrifying truth. The assassination attempt was not random. It was part of a larger conspiracy, a plot that reached into the highest levels of the empire. The leader was Lord Minho of House Vorn, one of the most powerful nobles in the Ascendant Empire. He had been gathering allies for years, quietly building a faction of nobles who resented the emperor's rule. They wanted change. They wanted power. And they were willing to kill anyone who stood in their way. Yuna's ship had been sabotaged on Meridian 7. Her guards had been bribed to abandon her. The raiders who attacked her were not random criminals, but hired killers. The entire thing had been planned to remove her and Sora from the line of succession. When Daniel saved them, he had disrupted years of careful plotting. Now, Lord Minho wanted him dead. "We must find proof," Yuna said. They were in her private study, surrounded by reports and intelligence documents. The Emperor had assigned them to lead the investigation, recognizing that they were the most motivated to uncover the truth. "We know Minho is guilty, but knowing is not enough. We need evidence that will convince the Council of Lords." Daniel studied the documents spread across the table. Names, dates, financial records. The web of conspiracy was complex, with hundreds of threads leading in different directions. "Then let's start pulling threads," he said. The weeks that followed were intense. Daniel and Yuna worked together every day, following leads and interviewing witnesses. They traveled to distant outposts, searched through ancient records, and interrogated captured assassins. Slowly, piece by piece, they assembled the evidence they needed. They also learned about each other. Yuna told Daniel about her childhood. Her mother had died when she was young, killed in an accident that she now suspected was murder. Her father, the Emperor, had grown distant after that loss, burying himself in the duties of ruling. Yuna had been raised by servants and tutors, never quite fitting in with her siblings, always feeling like an outsider in her own family. "I was never supposed to matter," she said one night. They were on her ship, traveling back from an investigation on a remote moon. "I was the youngest daughter, far from the throne. I had no power, no importance. I was invisible." "You're not invisible now," Daniel said. "No. Now I am married to a human and at the center of a conspiracy to overthrow my father." She laughed quietly. "The universe has a strange sense of humor." Daniel told her about the war, about the friends he had lost, the things he had done to survive, about the nightmares that still woke him in the middle of the night, the guilt that never quite went away. "I was good at killing," he said. "That was my skill, my purpose. And when the war ended, I didn't know who I was anymore. I drifted for years, looking for something that would make me feel alive again." Yuna reached out and took his hand. Her fingers were huge compared to his, but her touch was gentle. "Perhaps we were both lost," she said. "Perhaps we found each other." Daniel looked at their joined hands, her violet skin against his brown. Two beings from different worlds, different species, brought together by chance and law and something else he could not name. "Perhaps we did," he said. The evidence they gathered was overwhelming. Financial records showing payments from Lord Minho to the raiders on Meridian 7. Communications proving his involvement in the assassination attempt. Testimony from captured conspirators, naming him as their leader. But presenting this evidence to the Council of Lords was dangerous. Minho had many allies, nobles who benefited from his schemes or feared his anger. If the presentation failed, if the council chose not to act, then Minho would know they were coming for him, and he would not give them a second chance. "We need to be certain," Yuna said. "One chance. We get one chance to expose him." Daniel nodded. "Then we make it count." They spent days preparing the presentation. Every piece of evidence was organized, every argument rehearsed. They worked late into the night, eating meals together, falling asleep over documents. On the night before the council meeting, Yuna came to Daniel's room. I cannot sleep, she said. I keep thinking about everything that could go wrong. Daniel moved aside, making space for her on the couch. She sat down, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. Whatever happens tomorrow, Daniel said finally, we face it together. Yuna looked at him. Her golden eyes were soft in the dim light. Together, she agreed. She leaned down and pressed her forehead against his. It was a Valorant gesture of trust, of intimacy. Daniel closed his eyes and felt her warmth, her presence, the connection that had grown between them. Tomorrow they would face their enemies. Tomorrow they would fight for truth and justice and survival. But tonight, in this quiet moment, they were just two people who had found each other in the darkness. And that was enough. The Festival of Stars was the most sacred celebration in the Ascendant Empire. For 3 days, the people honored their ancestors and celebrated their history. The palace was filled with music, dancing, and joy. Lord Minho chose this moment to make his final move. His soldiers struck during the main ceremony, when the emperor and the nobles were gathered in the great hall. They came through hidden passages, wearing the uniforms of palace guards. By the time anyone realized what was happening, it was already too late. Minho's forces seized the central spire of the palace. They captured the emperor, dozens of nobles, and hundreds of servants. They locked down the building and trained weapons on anyone who tried to approach. Daniel and Yuna were in the garden when the attack began. They heard the explosions, saw the smoke rising from the spire. Guards rushed past them, shouting orders, trying to organize a response. Father, Yuna breathed. Her face had gone pale. They ran to the command center, where the Imperial Guard was gathering. General Jinsu, the commander of palace security, stood before a holographic map of the building. His expression was grim. 50 armed soldiers hold the spire, he reported. Lord Minho has positioned hostages throughout the structure. Any direct assault will result in massive casualties. What are his demands? Yuna asked. The Emperor's abdication. Exile for the entire imperial family. Transfer of power to House Vorn. The general's voice was heavy with anger. He has given us 6 hours to comply. The room fell silent. Everyone knew what would happen if they refused. Minho would start killing hostages. The Emperor would die. The Empire would fall into chaos. Daniel studied the holographic map. The spire was heavily fortified, with guards at every entrance and weapons covering every approach. A frontal assault was impossible, but there were other ways in. The maintenance tunnels, he said quietly. General Jinsu turned to him with surprise. What? I've been exploring the palace for months. I found old maintenance tunnels that run under the spire. They were sealed years ago, but they still exist. Daniel pointed to a section of the map. If someone could get through those tunnels and into the spire, they could neutralize the guards from inside. Create confusion. Free the hostages. The general shook his head. The tunnels are too narrow for Valorant soldiers. And even if we could send someone through, they would be facing 50 enemies alone. It would be suicide. For a Valorant, yes. Daniel met the general's eyes. But I'm not a Valorant. The room went silent again. Everyone stared at Daniel, as if he had lost his mind. You cannot be serious, General Jinsu said. You are one human against an army. It is impossible. Humans have been doing impossible things since we first looked up at the stars, Daniel replied. That's what we do. We fight when we should run. We survive when we should die. We never know when to give up. He looked at Yuna. She was watching him with an expression he had never seen before. Fear and hope and something else. Something deeper. Let me do this, he said to her. Let me save your father. Yuna was quiet for a long moment. Then she straightened and turned to the general. My husband will succeed, she said. Her voice rang with absolute certainty. He is human. They do not know how to fail. Prepare your forces for a signal. When Daniel gives the word, we attack. The general looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Yuna's eyes stopped him. He nodded slowly. Very well. May the stars guide you, human. Daniel entered the tunnels as the festival fireworks exploded in the sky above the palace. The sound and light provided cover, hiding his approach from any sensors or guards. He moved through the darkness with only a small light to guide him, squeezing through passages that had not been used in centuries. The tunnels were narrow and dangerous. Collapsed sections blocked his path. Creatures scurried in the shadows. But Daniel kept moving forward, one step at a time, the way he had survived countless battles before. After an hour, he reached the spire. He emerged in a storage room on the lower levels. Voices echoed from the corridor outside. Guards patrolling, talking casually, confident in their victory. Daniel moved like a ghost through the building. He had spent his military career learning how to be invisible, how to kill without being seen. Those skills had never left him. The first guard died without making a sound. The second managed a choked cry before Daniel's blade found his throat. The third turned at the wrong moment and caught a knife in the eye. One by one, Daniel worked his way up through the spire. He freed servants who had been tied up in storage rooms. He disabled communication equipment. He planted explosives at key locations. The guards began to realize something was wrong. Reports stopped coming from certain areas. Patrols failed to return. Fear spread through their ranks. What's happening? One soldier asked his companion. I don't know. Maybe it's ghosts. Don't be stupid. There's no such thing as ghosts. Daniel smiled in the darkness. They would learn soon enough. The main throne room was heavily guarded. Minho himself stood before the captured emperor, gloating about his victory. 20 soldiers surrounded them, weapons ready. Daniel had 12 explosives, one knife, and a stolen pistol. It would have to be enough. He triggered the explosives simultaneously. The building shook. Lights flickered. Alarms screamed. In the moment of confusion, Daniel burst through a side door and started shooting. The battle was chaos. Daniel moved constantly, never staying in one place long enough to be targeted. He used the confusion of the explosions, the smoke and noise and panic. He shot 3 guards before they could react, stabbed 2 more, used a falling chandelier to crush a 6th. Minho screamed orders at his soldiers, but they were not prepared for this. They had expected a siege, a negotiation, an organized assault. They had not expected a single human attacking. Like a demon from the old stories. Daniel reached the emperor and cut his bonds. Your Majesty. Time to go. The emperor stared at him with wide eyes. You came alone? Humans are stubborn that way. Daniel pulled the old monarch to his feet. Now move. They ran as the remaining guards tried to reorganize. Daniel triggered his final explosive, bringing down a section of ceiling and blocking pursuit. He activated the signal device Yuna had given him. Outside, the Imperial Guard began their assault. The battle ended within the hour. Minho's forces, already in disarray from Daniel's attack, could not withstand the combined might of the palace guards. Soldiers surrendered or died. Lord Minho himself was captured trying to flee through a window. Daniel emerged from the spire as the sun rose over the palace. He was covered in blood and dust, exhausted beyond words. But he was alive. Yuna met him at the entrance. She did not speak. She simply fell to her knees before him, wrapping her arms around his body, holding him like she would never let go. You did it, she whispered. You impossible, wonderful human. You did it. Daniel leaned into her embrace. I had good motivation. The celebration that followed lasted for days. The conspiracy was exposed, the traitors were arrested, and Lord Minho was sentenced to eternal imprisonment. The Emperor publicly embraced Daniel, calling him a true son of the Empire. But none of that mattered to Daniel. What mattered was the moment. Weeks later, when Yuna came to him in their garden, the same garden where they had first agreed to try being partners, she knelt before him again. This time, her eyes were shining with tears. "I did not choose you," she said. "The law chose you. Fate chose you. But if I could go back, if I could choose freely from everyone in the universe." She took his hands in hers. "I would choose you, Daniel. 1,000 times. 1,000,000 times. Forever." Daniel looked up at his wife. His giant warrior princess, who had fought beside him, trusted him, believed in him when no one else would. "I choose you too," he said. "Even the part where your family is completely insane." She laughed through her tears. And then she kissed him, lifting him from the ground with her strength, holding him against her chest. Years later, historians would write about their marriage. They would describe it as a turning point in human valor and relations, a symbol of unity between two peoples. They would analyze the political implications, the cultural impact, the historical significance. But Daniel and Yuna did not care about history. They cared about the children they raised, tall and brave and stubborn. They cared about the quiet evenings in the garden, watching the stars together. They cared about the small moments of joy that made up a life. On the anniversary of their first meeting, Daniel would look at his wife and marvel at the impossible journey that had brought them together. A dark corridor, a desperate fight, a choice made without thought or calculation. He had saved her life that night. But in every way that mattered, she had saved his, and they lived, not happily ever after. Because life is never that simple. They lived together, facing whatever came, stronger as two than they could ever be alone. That was enough. That was everything.